Moltes gràcies per haver vingut avui, no? Un dia no molt fred, entre setmana, etc., però em consta que per molta gent és molt lluny. Aquesta és una xerrada entre la Rossella Biscotti, l'artista de l'exposició Cable City Dance, Cable City Sí, que es pot veure actualment aquí, a la planta baixa i la planta 1 de la Fabra i Quart Centre d'Art Contemporani, i que estarà oberta fins al 25 de febrer, que us animem, evidentment, si esteu aquí, a haver-la vist abans o veure-la després. Juntament amb la Rossella Biscotti està la Övül Durmusoglu i la seva xerrada la moderarà l'Anna Manubens. Jo us deixo directament amb elles, només dir que crec que aquesta xerrada pot aportar moltes coses, no només pel títol meravellós que li heu posat, que per mi ja diu molt, no només per les obres que podeu veure a sota, sinó més enllà. Evidentment les constel·lacions de tota la feina de la Rossella són infinites, no només pels anys que li dedica a cada projecte, sinó precisament pels tentacles que toquen cada una de les seves obres. I després també per la relació que em consta que té la Rossella amb l'Övül, que també ve de lluny i que també és tentacular. I res, us deixo amb elles, us animo també a preguntar quan toqui i a fer la conversa més gran. Gràcies.
Doncs per part meva, I'll do a brief introduction, just hello in Catalan, and then I'll switch to English. Només agrair a la Joana, a la Clara, a l'equip de Fabra, que hagin generat el context perquè tingui lloc aquesta conversa i que em convidin a mi a moderar-la, que és una posició curiosa perquè de fet jo crec que elles dues podrien parlar soles perfectament, però crec que el que jo afegeixo és que en lloc de ser una conversa de comissària que pregunta a l'artista, que potser és un model més habitual, jo els puc preguntar sobre la relació que tenen entre elles dues i com la pràctica comissarial de la Övül pot a vegades haver-se nodrit de la pràctica de la Rossella i al revés. I think that's going to be my privilege when moderating. So I'll translate. It's not just about, I think that my role in this is, of course, to cover some traits of Rossella's work, starting probably with the works that are in the exhibition, because maybe it's a common ground that we have. But I think that you two could perfectly talk to each other without me. It's one question I asked to Rossella when she invited me. It's like, why do you want me there? And I think that what I add to the... So they both enjoy collective thinking, but I think it also allows to talk about the relationship and to draw parallels between your work. And I think maybe that's going to be my role. So I will do this warming up exercise. I will read your bios so that we don't take for granted that everybody knows everything. So Övül Durmusoglu is a curator, writer and educator. Lo diré despacito so they can translate. Who works on constructive critiques of civilization, the sustainability of intersectional future, and practices of togetherness. She co-leads Art in Discourse at the Braunschweig University of Art. Övül has recently created 2 major monographic exhibitions. One of them, which maybe some of you saw because it was at Centro de Arte 2 de Mayo with Pauline Boudry and Renat Lawrence. And the other one at Stockholm, or was it that, yes, Bern and Stockholm together. Yes. And then 1,000 Years of Troubled Genders. She also co-created the 3rd and 4th edition of Autostrada Biennale in Kosovo with Joanna Warswa between 2020 and 2023. And earlier she worked as a curator for, this is always very difficult for me to say, Steirischer Herbst, the festival in Austria, and curated programs for the 10th and 13th and 14th Istanbul biennials. And you were also present at Documenta. Among many other things, they have both very impressive women. Rossella's work deals with the exploration of forgotten or untraced events that reveal changing value systems. She's interested in manifesting a subject's construction through its alliances and resistances against violent institutionalized structures. sensibly weaving together traces of life, concepts, and materials into new narratives. Her work has been presented everywhere, but to name a few, what are your more dear, maybe, contexts of presentation? How do you choose them? If you were to name places where you've shown work that were significant to you, since I may ask you that, instead of reading a list?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, and maybe enters really in the topic of today, because, for example, I can talk about Istanbul, that has been for a long time a place where I have been going and coming back, and how there I have shown from a small gallery, from project like the project that was initiated by Övül, Ancient Works, to the Istanbul Biennial. So it has been a very long, engaging, and also like the city that is presented here, it was also presented in Istanbul with a non-profit, I will not call it space because it's more an organization that hasn't a space, but is a non-profit that is called Proto Cinema, that also helped to realize it. So it has been a long collaboration with the city. This is probably the best sample of what has been chosen, and then other things choose you. So
maybe we can, I think that a way to introduce your work in the way it overlaps would be to ask you both, what are the traits in Rossella's work that are connected or that help you think through your own research, and vice versa? What is it in the work that Övül has been carrying out that you found like nourishing, or things to hold on to, or things you kept after you met her? Because you've actually been talking to each other for quite a significant amount of time.
I'm very happy to be back in Barcelona. Spain is almost my second family country for my work, because I have a long conversation also with Arco, and also work with K2M in Madrid, and was a resident at Bar long time ago, so I'm also very familiar with the city. So it's nice to be coming back with a very dear person, a very dear collaborator in my life, to expand our conversation, which also starts, of course, as artist-curator conversation, but which also expands also beyond that, being very implicit in each other's research and practice, though we never actually spoke about it publicly. Because
it's a coming out.
Yes, it's the first actually public event that we are doing. So of course, like the question that you ask is very meaningful for me. As someone, I'm a practitioner coming from a very particular context and particular time in Turkey. I grew up in the post-coup d'etat environment, where contemporary art became a real powerful tool in order to speak about the things that couldn't be spoken before, about the foundation discourse in Turkey, about militarism, about nationalism, racism, and also homophobia. So I especially would like to say that because my engagement with contemporary art is really like coming from a very political engagement. How do we imagine differently? How do we talk about history differently? That was my starting point in my work as a curator. So I think one of our common interests with Rossella is this fictional construction of collective memory. And what is at stake when we decide to show the fictitiousness and to talk about the intrinsic codes there, and how then we make art really as an playful, effective instrument to deal with that. So a certain poetic, reorientalizing a certain poetic effect for a larger goal, which can be long in distance, long in horizon. I would say this is maybe a very core point. And then, of course, the next level is the engagement with the larger machinery of history. Of course, it's our collective memories that we are dealing with, is coming from very particular countries with particular political movements that defined history also in Europe. But what are the implications of those histories in the larger machinery, in the history of modernity run by the racial capitalist code? And this is also to be able to make connections and to be able to discuss those connections, to be able to make them visible, but also discuss the fragility of invisibility also, when certain things become visible, and what it creates, with that visibility is also another thing. So I kind of, these two deep things very connected to each other. Because in my curatorial work, I always go back to that collective memory. I always face this collective memory, also in Turkey, but also outside when I'm working internationally. This is something that keeps on coming in my work, but of course these tasks are lifelong tasks, no?
Connecting to, when we met first time, we met during the Documenta 13. I was presenting this work called The Trial. It's a work that I put in this PowerPoint. Is of course not presented in this exhibition, but we thought that it was very important to, as a starting point, because it was the moment in which we met.
Yes.
But also, I later presented, when I presented in Documenta, I presented as a series of sculptures. I will tell very briefly the history of this work, just to give a context, but it's a very long-term project that I did it for many years. And it's a trial on that happened between 82 and 84 in Italy. It's a political trial called 7 April, on Italian, let's say, from a very large group of Italian militants. They were from intellectual professors to militants in various parts of Italy, and then they were tried mainly on charges of terrorism and against basically creating an organization that was going against the power of state. So they were tried on a charge of life imprisonment. Many did preventive jail. It's a very long trial. I worked for various years. I created a series of sculptures that are casted, concrete sculptures that are casted in the courthouse. But then at a certain point, for me, this sculpture that also had a sort of theatrical positioning of what were the core points in this room were not enough. So I started, the main work was actually an audio piece. And I will also talk about it because if you have seen the work in this show, also you will see how there is to me this medium, yes, the medium of sound and the voices. And I edited the whole trial. There was more than 100 hours. I edited in the 6 hours piece that I presented first as an audio piece. And then at a certain point we document, and then later, the first time I did it, actually, the performance was in Istanbul. I started a series of performances in which a translator will translate this trial live. And after a while, actually with Istanbul, I decided that I didn't want just a professional translator. I wanted to connect the life of this person with this translation, because I thought the remaking of this trial and the words that passes through a person, they get actualized and they get translated maybe in a different language. I even did it in Italian. Would be important that somehow the biography of the person doing this and the biography of the people that are tried will have a relation in between each other. So I started to create a group of people that translated. But the first time I did it was in Istanbul. And actually it was the first time I came to the city. And from there it started a long collaboration. Yes. And and we also met during that documenta. So we met on this somehow ground of politics and art. And later when I came back to Istanbul, it was a very particular moment because I was also somehow preparing for the Istanbul biennial, but also at the same time there were the Gezi protests. So we were somehow, I was guided with Övül in between this protest while preparing for the Istanbul biennial. And we started this visiting with a project that maybe, Övül, you want to give a context. We went to, I think it was the year after or the same year? The same year.
This is the visit that is at the origin of the city.
Yes.
The piece that is downstairs.
There's downstairs, yes. That's downstairs.
Yeah, we started a project. Övül maybe can explain better, but she invited me and another artist for a project called Ancient Works that was involving archaeology. So I think this is a good example of how things overlapped in between something that was a common ground of interest also in relation to this trial that we discussed very long and after were presented by Övül also in Sofia, and also how a new project started and with which kind of interest and which kind of guidance of not only Övül but also by another artist and another curator that accompany me in this project.
Indeed, I think trial is very important to talk about. Also, I think in your work, I mean, it introduces us to each other, but I do think a lot of the things that we are also seeing in this exhibition, I of course see a lot of connections with the methodologies that you already developed or like effectively put there. And these are the threads that are still moving for me in your work. But of course, this is a more curatorial maybe take. And to go back, of course, like the trial, is a very fresh work if you think about, because even though it's talking about this particular accusation of militancy and the philosophical militancy in Italy, it is actually talking about the historical camps of the progressive thought and conservative fascist thinking or like position taking. And I would maybe like kind of start to, because it's also connected, I find, like to our engagement in Turkey and in Gezi also as well, that it's important to think about the court. I mean, today this image of the court is very present for all of us with the International Court of Justice. Proceedings, South Africa's proceedings on Palestine, and questioning the genocidal intentions of the Israel from foundations on, from 48 on, is almost also another like a kind of a historical staging that kind of happens there, that shows actually the trial, the court room.
Which is a space where what you were describing in the beginning, the fictitiousness
Exactly.
of collective memory.
Exactly.
Which I'm not sure it's necessarily a weakness. It can also be a strength, but it's clearly reshaped and discussed through the dramaturgy, and the legal, structure of a trial.
Yes.
So I think, this was one of my last questions for you.
Okay.
To
But it would be good to go back to maybe.
Yes.
It would be good to go back to, because then in the end maybe we can close, because I really do think what happens in this work in trial is about activating witness position. So as public, when we enter this performative stage of the trial, then we are not only reading the history that is given to us, but the art opens up the space for us to activate our positions if we want to take that position. Of course, some may not to, some may not like. That's also, that's also open. Yet this activating the witness position, like how do we activate that witness position? How witnessing can really become more than a passive position taking in this fictitiousness of history is a really important, that's the standpoint. So of course, if, let's say contemporarily, if you like cinema, you may think of Alice Diop's Saint Omar, or Justin Thierry's Anatomy of a Fall, which also is really also talking about like this court case, because it's a very symbolic space right now, I think, to think about our relationship, our implicitness in this whole system. So also progressive archaeological thinking that exists in this work also pushed our conversation forward, because when we initiated ancient works, Asar-ı Atıka in Ottoman Turkish, about the position of archaeology and language in the construction of a national identity as the core of its own understanding as a modern subject, was the core of our research, when I actually desired as a curator, as someone who wanted to again activate that position of witnessing, to have two different voices, two different positions, to look at that construction between archaeology, museum making, language, and this modern subjecthood, nation as a modern subject, to maybe open up certain questions that I cannot answer on my own because I'm too much inside. And then that actually the proximate, close, but like different point of views may open that up for me. So that's how we push the project forward with Mari Spirito, who is also a dear collaborator, an American curator, long time living in Turkey, to have this research with Rossella and with Akram Zatari, is a Lebanese Beirut-based artist who's also has his own questions regarding the historical construction and the fictitiousness of history. And indeed, now looking back at it, 2013, just after the Arab Spring and in this environment also what the war in Syria being more present also in the region and reshaping Turkey was very kind of a critical turning point in our work or also engagement in Istanbul, but also in our work in reassessing those histories, those positions, those witnessings in our work. So therefore, we started from the institution, which is the Museum of My Childhood in Ankara. It's the first museum, it's the first cultural institution of the Turkish Republic. It's called Anatolian Civilizations Museum. And a brief research period in Ankara inside the museum pushed actually both, especially Rossella, to question, but where are those objects coming from? How this museum is being made? So how the excavation, how the making of those objects, how the visibility of these objects, taking them from the ground to up, is not really present in the construction of this museum, which took us to the sites, and there we ended Çatalhöyük, which is one of the most important sites that constructed this museum, gave its very core excavated objects that also became very functional tools in the construction of that national history and its roots, going beyond Ottoman Empire. So actually that's all the roots of the city. Let's say it was a kind of the beginnings of the city. That was
maybe a couple of things also how in this connection between, for example, these two works, the trial of the city or other works that you have seen in the exhibition, like the journey, and the idea, I mean, when you talk about the active witnessing and a sort of dramaturgy, as you have mentioned, that are for me fundamental for my work, because in a way, otherwise there is no narration. So for me, everything starts from the idea, how do you really narrate something? And in that, there is a lot of editing. But this editing doesn't come only for video works, so only for time-based work. For me, the editing is really the base of also sculptures. So even like in the trial, for example, is how do you choose which sculpture to cast? And this sculpture has a particular meaning. So is, for example, the floor in which the seat of the judge moves, and then it kind of consumes the floor. So when you go to cast, you will see these traces of the moving of the chair. Or is the bars from which behind there were the defendant looking inside of the court. So of course we are talking about court, and as you said, at this moment particularly is a very symbolic moment to talk about it, because we have been seeing, I hope we all have been seeing this trial in not in TV, not on BBC, not on CNN, probably in Al Jazeera or in some YouTube channels. I saw it from outside the International Court of Justice. So it's, and of course trials, they are always a dramaturgy, they're always constructed. The difference is the trial I edited, it was a trial with that lasted 1.5 years, and there were the defendants were talking, there were testimonies, there were repentance, there were judges, there were accusatory, so it was a full theater, let's say. With you will even see, you even hear the public, you hear the photo camera clicking, so you have the full courthouse active. In the trial that we have seen of I only saw the South African first day hearing. Of course, there is not the response, immediate response. There are no questioning. So it's already constructed in the narration. Each word is there at the right place. And so this is, I talk about editing, as I said, when I construct a narration, and you will see it also in the way things are put together sometimes, and that's where it comes the active role. So for me, it's very important in which the way basically spectators are not just passive spectator, but they connect the points of narration that is not only in relation to the works, and now you work from work to work, but also in between each other. So what is the relation between the city and the journey? What is the relation between a ground floor and a first floor? And also this idea of being active witness. For example, I can take again the example of the trial in which, for example, in the performance, who was the translator is actually, they were mainly like friends of people that I thought they were interested because of their biography, because they were studying political philosophy, because they were militant, because they were artists working with radio on political topics. And in that moment, they become defendant, or they become in between in the moment in which translate. But then when there is a new position with someone else, they become also spectator again. So there is always this changing. And at the same time, also the spectator of the trial, they are also a present spectator of the performance. So it's this position for me are very important. And maybe, yeah, I answered this.
Yes, I also would like, because if I may, if I kind of push a little bit like kind of the thread in between the a work that we don't see, but it's very much like kind of connecting to other works towards, if we take it again, like towards the city. We are again like kind of being connected. You have a very special connection to the sites. I mean, this witnessing is becoming tactile because of the connection to the site, because it becomes visible as a place for us to be, because these are very abstract concepts, of course, all these historical big threads. But in your spaces, in your places, they become more tactile, where this activating is also possible. But these places are also functioning for me like models, like a new proposals of for the that can be made, that can be created by the communities that are inside those places. Then I also feel that is a thing that connects you to Çatalhöyük as this very ahead of its time kind of excavation structure that has its own community, that has its own space and time in a very, especially at that point, going fast conservative environment in Turkey. So what would you like to say about like these connection to site and the placeness and this maybe...
I think the archaeological relationship with evidence in the city is very peculiar, and it might be, or it might very well connect to the sort of active witnessing, because I think it was called post-processual, and basically what it intended is that observation is always subjective, and that you might be sort of fabricating evidence as you search or as you try to establish a narrative. And I think it's interesting because there's sort of material active witnessing that is also taking place there.
I mean, for me, places, sites are very important, and also the being there. So in a way, I develop while being there, and that's also part of this. I think that's also why I was so interested in this archaeological process, because somehow it was also what I was doing. And so I wanted to be in a place where people research on site and they elaborate narrations that are, as you say, evidence, but they are narrating civilization, or they are narrating. They are putting the evidence together in a story, basically. And so that's why I was also so interested in Çatalhöyük. And it had many of the things I was also curious about. I was curious, how do you do that in a scientific way? Because of course, as an artist, you do that, but differently. And this subjectivity is always so present. So of course, this post-processual method was interesting, especially because it was happening on site with a sort of community. Then the idea of community, somehow you also see in the installation. I will not say that it fails, but it gets questioned at a certain point. But in the Çatalhöyük, at that moment in which there was under the lead of Ian Oder, which is a British archaeologist, many from students till the super specialists, they were invited on site for a certain amount of time. There was 1.5 months, 2 months season during the summer, all together. So around between 100 and 200 people living on site and researching on site. So from excavating till elaborating the whatever was excavated and this evidence in the laboratory on site. And the idea was also that everything that was coming in this informal conversation of eating together, being on site together, the specialist and the student, was creating this narration. So that's what I thought it was important to explore, but also by being inside. So I became part of the team for 2 years, and I was allowed to be there in every place and in every moment, and to film. The first year I filmed notes, so I was with my own camera, and actually was the moment in which that you see is very active, is very, there are a lot of theories being put in place, and I recorded while they were just being spoken there. And then when I came back the second year with the idea to make a proper documentary, and with a film crew, a very small film crew of 2 people, and also because the bureaucracy to enter the site was very long, the night we arrived, there was the attempt coup d'etat in Turkey, and the site decided to pull out and close. So basically what we filmed was the closing of the site and the meeting in which they decide to do that. But what you see is the emergence of what we thought. I mean, of course, nobody thinks it's just a community. Everybody knows the site is security, the site is a construction, the site is a structure. So, but what you see, and also is being pushed in the installation that you see downstairs, is this separation and difference in between the first part as a living community of Çatalhöyük and the second part as the structure of the site. So you immediately know that the site has a security, that everybody has to live, that there is a danger, that everybody gets packed. You see this huge amount of sandbags. And of course, again, I pushed the narration because the sandbags, for example, they get placed there every year, but I multiply them in such a way that you feel the closure and the pressure of the political moment, and also like what's the sites represents besides this community and this narration he was created, or he created for himself, till the complete reclosure of the site and the complete emptiness, and everything gets in boxes. So there is also this idea that you were mentioning of, I was also interested in this void that was created by the archaeology. And that's also in there. I mean, where it was tombs or where it was something, then it gets, of course, it becomes evidence, it becomes data, and at the end you have a lot of numbers, a lot of data being placed somewhere in this internet, in this database, but also becomes void. So where it was something, where it was this mound that was full of something, of a civilization, also it becomes kind of craters and voids, and so you see the shapes, but you see also that is missing something that has been taken out.
Actually, that process that you're describing is something that becomes like so tactile in a site like Çatalhöyük because of its construction, because every house was built on top of each other, and each house had, because of the traditions, had ancestral bodies buried already in the houses. So it already like kind of becomes a accumulative temple that completes itself in a very particular way. But also in terms of like there is, I think in the city there are various parallels, time parallels that are going, and of course the one is the excavation going under, and then the one is the time above, and then the one is then coming from the real time, the real politic, that is being implicated. So there are various layers of temporality that we are experiencing in the construction of the city. But also, as you suggest, it's a very particular time that actually that marks the change of the excavations in Turkish archaeological sites, because from that point of the closure, there were very few international communities allowed to excavate in Turkey as part of this whole closure that really started in 2015 in Turkey. So it was also a closure of those historical data towards outside, not sharing it with outside and keeping it inside as well.
Maybe one point, I mean, there are two things. I was also very interested in relation to this, to the research of Çatalhöyük, because it comes also in the video at a certain point. The ancestors that are buried in the house, what they discovered that they are actually not genetically related in between each other. So there was this idea of what it constitutes a group that stands together, that is not a real, not a family as we intended now. And also part of the research was that the lower houses were sharing common walls, while where they're going up within the stratification, the one on top, they each had their own wall. So there was this idea of starting the idea of property. So for me, Çatalhöyük has always been interesting, and also what it comes in the work and in the video is because somehow what I wanted is talking about society, but do it within this lower layer, this ancient layer. And what you talk about, it comes on top is, of course, the politics that just breaks in. But in the beginning, you see these two things coming together. That is how these archaeologists deal with each other. How do they embody these spaces? How do they work there? But in the moment in which you work, you also feel it's a sort of community, it's a sort of society. And they talk about the society they are excavating. So these two come together, and then we see the structure coming on top.
Yes. Can I ask you, so we talk about other works, because I think we could talk about each, but maybe to build a transition between the city and something else. I mean, a moment ago you said artists do it differently. And I was wondering, because what you see in the city is this practice of trying to read and decipher material, like walls, bodies. And then there's a lot of sculptural and material work that you do alongside audio work, trial, editing, dramaturgy, creating a dramaturgy. There tends to be always something that you fabricate materially, and I was wondering how this might be working in reverse, so that you're somehow encrypting certain things, creating some material renderings for the future somehow. So I'm thinking about the work with the ashes, or the composting that you did with a woman in Venice, which created this sort of work. I was wondering if this is what you meant by artists do it differently.
Thank you for the question. Yes, and actually I was just wondering, we were wondering why I didn't insert the picture of the Venice, of this composting, because it's really pertinent, as you say at this point, is, yes, that for me they are a sort of, you call it decoding the material. Also. Somehow it's, for me it's very interesting, because I always think I started from three things. One is sometimes a location, so a site, a story, or a material. So for me they have the same importance, the same intensity. And this idea of decoding is a bit there. For me, a material has many things, because of course it comes from somewhere, it has a history, and sometimes it's a history that you can trace in time, or you can trace to a site. It connects with a lot of people, with a lot of things, it connects with the landscape. So when I use something, I really think about it. Or, for example, these ashes actually is interesting because they come from my research I was doing on plantation in Southeast Asia, and I went to a oil palm plantation in Malaysia, where I visited the incinerator. So at the end of the whole production, basically everything gets exploited. So, and the last fibers of the fruits of the, I don't know exactly what it's called, but of the fruits of the palm basically get incinerated, and there is a sort of ash. And when I was leaving the site, I saw this mountain of ash, and I collect some of them, and I brought it with me to Europe. And I was thinking about, sometimes they use it back on the plantation as fertilizer. And I was thinking about these trees that are already somehow so manipulated, genetically manipulated, and everything. And then when they even get dead and they are transformed in ashes, how rich they are still. And I brought it back with me to Italy. Then there was the whole pandemic, and I went back to where I come from, to Puglia, to the south of Italy. And there I realized, I mean, since many, many years there was an epidemic. There was killing all the olive trees. It was a bacterial that would basically invisible. And for a long time, it was difficult to understand what it was. But then at that point, I realized that actually these olive trees, they were a plantation, and they were not part of the landscape completely. Of course, they were important. And specifically in that area, it was actually a plantation made for electricity. So they were planted for producing oil to bring to city, mainly in the 16th century, 15th century, 16th century. So for me, it was very strong to think about this, and this through the material of ashes. What I did is, like, every time I will find trees burning, I will go and collect the ashes from separate trees, and then I mix it always in a separate way with clay. I fire it in a wood oven in a local workshop, and that's how this jar or this ceramic are made. The beginning it was these ashes. They were coming really because of this. The whole project came because of this material, what it brought really to me in terms also symbolism, but also on material itself.
but also I find going back to the earth and using that earth material to create a tactility for your research there. In a way, I find what you are doing with the collecting the ashes is a model of excavation to happen there on the site. And then, of course, these are the sites where archaeology as we understand cannot really function. It needs to be something else. But the archaeological tool, archaeological methodology, then enables you maybe like kind of this intuition to collect the ashes as evidence and to bring the evidence inside material that can be considered actually material for an archaeological museum. I mean, if you put these jars, the amphoras, like they produce with these ashes, one may not really like kind of see a difference from those ancient ones that are generally displayed, especially in Mediterranean. It's something very, very common. So this I find also really very interesting, that twist or that reversal that takes place there, but still not using the archaeology as like this kind of classic instrument, but taking its tools and understandings towards archaeologies that we really need in the new histories that we want to write and understand and be part of. To understand where these trees are coming from, what are the implications of this electricity making, what it brought, how it made those cities, those civilizations there, and these are the things that actually we also need to understand in order to understand the present moment, in order to understand like the loads of the present that we are experiencing right now. I mean, I'm a little bit like kind of not experimenting, but like openly talking.
But maybe also a good point is the fact that, because also we were talking about the subjectivities and the fact that artists do it differently in this subjective way somehow, but it's interesting because actually I do a lot of research. So the starting point for me is very similar to a researcher. So really going on site and collecting all the information, doing interviews, and also sometimes with experts. For example, for the journey, I was also with an archaeologist, Timmy Gambin. And but then at a certain point, this process of collecting for me is not enough. And that's what it comes back to, this idea of the active witness. I don't want to bring this material as it is to the exhibition. For me, it's important to make a transfer. Sometimes I call it translation, and then it goes back to this idea of trial. Yes. So how do you translate this material into something that is more a story, or is more a narration, or is a dramaturgy, something that can be put together, but then again broken up. So, for example, it's like this idea of putting together and broken up, again, is very visible in the city, because I had the idea to do a documentary, and then at the end I broke it up in 5 screens, because for me it was representing more what I wanted to say, that it was also this fragmentary type of information, and also the fact that the project that has to be one, it had a thesis, it had an idea to make this documentary, didn't happen because of the reality of the politics. And I always like to let things enter in my project, to let this reality enter, or to not always, let's say, confirm my thesis, but let it broken up, or let it comes closer to a reality. And but for the journey is probably the opposite, because the journey is born, besides all the research, is born from a performance, and that I experienced, and I recorded in audio form. But then to...
Maybe you can just tell the story of the journey, because here you see the journey version 2023, which seems like you related to... I was wondering also the choice of the date, because in my head it would be the journey something 2023, because it's really been, it started somewhere else, and this is one of the versions of it. So maybe before you start talking, just so everyone knows what happened before and how it started and what you asked this sort of rock to make.
Yeah. So, the journey is very long, so I will try to be super brief. Because you are right, is the journey 2000, and I don't know which thousand to put, and I always change it. So you will find it in different forms, different year. But basically, in 2010, I received a prize in the city of Carrara for the International Biennial Carrara, that probably was the only edition that was international. And and the prize, the first prize, it was Prize Michelangelo, which was a block of marble of the dimension I wanted, from one of the most prestigious quarry, which has this white statuary marble. And I always thought, I was there with a work that was not in marble, and I always thought, I will use this prize at a certain point, but I will make a project. I will not make a sculpture. So after many years, I was interested in researching in the Mediterranean, and 2011, 2012, and I was already overlapping maps because I was interested in this idea of the sea as something that concealed, but I wanted to know also, in the navigation, we always know about the navigation, but I always was interested in this somehow depth of the sea, and the idea that can expand but can also go deep, and also with information. And I decided to take this block of marble and drop it in the middle of the Mediterranean. Of course, it was also the moment in which, in 2011, for example, I was in Lampedusa, and it was also I encountered, as it happens since 20, 30 years, many of the migrants that were crossing that route. So it was also part coming from that. And so this happened in 2022 as a performance for a performance festival in Brussels, the Kunst- Festival des Arts. And I started from Valletta, Malta, and I went on a route with a ship called Diligence, tracing basically a route that I made. There was tracing lines that were going from geological lines, point of interest, archaeological point, relics, lines, borders of various licenses, oil and gas. So all the information that I had collected, I overlapped, and I created this route till a certain point in which I drop overboard this block of marble. I was with a musician, Attila Faravelli, a photographer, Alexander Pace, a filmmaker, Cristian Manzutto, and with them I sort of constructed the narration that came after, which was a sound performance in Kunst- Festival des Arts and then in Tunis. I also recorded along the whole coastline of Tunis. There is always this image that I have, and I like to describe as, for me, the ship was a sort of moving, of course, and it was a sort of ship with ear. So while we were recording, at a certain point, Attila Faravelli put two microphones on two sides of the boat. And for me, it's interesting how these waves, sound wave and resonance can enlarge, and then they can go to the coastline and beyond. So I really started to think about this, how to translate by sound, really starting from this image. And then, so the year after, always in Kunst- Festival des Arts, I realized a sound performance. And what you have here is a sound composition that comes from the sound performance. So that's why it's 2023. This is very brief coming to the
But maybe
project.
It would be also nice to talk about the editorial aspect of it, because this is, again, something that's very common in your work how how excavation and editorial come side by side, and here we see a durational sound piece also with your editorial interventions.
So it's, I mean, for me, the journey was a very important piece in this sound dimension, but also because it's a collaboration, as many of my pieces, with the musician and editor. So the musician is Attila Faravelli, and the editor is Giuseppe Ielasi. And in a way, with Attila, I learned a lot about sound, about how to record, how to compose, and with Giuseppe as well. What for me was very important, that this composition will be really something that it will collect everything, but also will be composed. So you will not hear the field recordings raw. It's really composed till the note. And in that way, especially with the performance, but I think here, if you let yourself take the time and really be in the center, you really can travel with it. You can really go along the various stages of this journey till the end, that there is the part of the Tunisia, but you can be on the boat, you can experience also the shakiness of the boat, how it really moves, how it really makes things vibrate. And this is for me very important. In terms of, there is also somehow a editing that is consequential, so we go from side to side. In this particular editing, things are not mixed. They really move from one location to another one. The other things that I think is important, that and it also comes to what Anna said, and it always confuses people, but I think it's really inherent to my work, is the fact that I always change it, even by keeping the work. So for me, the context of an exhibition is extremely important. So I cannot just transfer and work in a location like Fabre-Côtes. I have to think about, I will work in the space and I will change it to make the spectator have an experience that is closer to the work, that I will just keep it as it is. So for me, this is very important. It's part of that form of editing that is not only an editing of the piece, but is an editing in space.
Last question to maybe touch on the conductor piece, which is upstairs but not visible, but somewhat there. But I think there's something in the journey that has to do with putting yourself through the struggle of going through. And I think it's that the beauty of the sound piece is also about the resistance. You know, it's the sound of the resistance of a weight against the water, and at the same time, in the sea, a lot of the bearings for our sound bearings. You know, there's not so much vision on the water, it's more about sound, so there's all of that there. But mostly, I think the journey for you was a huge bureaucratic work. And it has to do with, and I think it also appeared in your conversation with the city, like it's a structure, it's a political device, it's a sort of, there's all those infrastructures there also that you somehow need to break through, and as you break them through, they somehow appear, no? And I think they both connect in, not only because it's about things that are infrastructural, but also in a negotiation of visibility. You know, on the journey, you have that here, you have that too. So maybe we can wrap up with this and open so that you can also ask questions. But you can maybe comment on that, infrastructure, visibility.
Yeah, I think there is a lot of that.
The struggle.
And that's also, I mean, also like visualize the infrastructure. I mean, visualize what is behind. And it's interesting because the city, yes, is bureaucratic, because I needed to have a permission to enter, but once you enter, you are there. And all the places that look very bureaucratic, like, for example, the trial, they are all done without permission. So actually, the only possibility to do things in the courthouse, it was to convince somebody to open and close me behind, and I will do everything, and then I will leave. So there has never been permission in the trial for me to be there, and I did even a performance inside. And with the ship, the same. I mean, I research bureaucratically.
You don't get the permission, but you struggle not to get
but
it.
I
So
struggled.
you're also confronted with it somehow.
Yeah, I struggle with the wind because we got a very strong Scirocco at a certain point, so I could not, respect my route. But I had to go with the swell and the waves and negotiate with the captain and with money what will happen with this block of marble and our route. But in itself, for example, the first research I did, it was like, is it possible to drop a block of marble inside of the water? And international water is possible. But of course, I had to be careful to not drop it in a place that would create trouble. So that also was part of the research of it. But we went out with this block of marble and we didn't ask anyone permission. But the idea is, this idea of making visible is very important, and of course it's about history as well. So in the beginning, in my early work, I was really talking about amnesia. So some of the historic events which not only were hidden, but they were really forgotten for a sort of political amnesia. And but also like how sometimes we don't see what is behind, or this structure is always present, how to visualize it, how to bring it to the surface, and that's pretty much it. I don't know if there is time to talk about a conductor, but I think we reached.
Yes, I don't know if there's a question.
Maybe just kind of closing with the choice with the material, because how these earthly materials transmitting us messages about the new ways of history, it's very much closely also related. I mean, it is the marble, it's the copper, it's the earth, and there is always a kind of a transmission that happens there. And then with that transmission, I think then we can open maybe. Yeah. Yes.
I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your choice of the route and the drop-off point that you chose to drop off the marble. Also, because you're speaking about editing a narrative, and like a journey itself is already kind of a story. So I was just curious to know a bit in more detail about that.
Yeah. I mean, when I talk about it, usually I have also images, and with that you really see it. Here there is one that sometimes comes, and you see there are lines that goes from very organic, and maybe they are the ones of the geological lines. Then there were some symbolic points. So there was a moment, for example, in which you will see, when we were just off the coast, you will see a Phoenician temple that was a particular location in which basically the Phoenician would welcome somehow with fire, but it was not welcome physically, but every ship that was coming in all directions. So when you go there, you will see that actually you see everything from Tunisia till Italy and the other side. So, and then it follows some geological lines. When you see straight lines, they are generally lines that are man-made, so usually or border lines, military operation, or licenses of oil and gas, so the whole division in between the various companies, and it's impressive to see, but the whole Mediterranean is basically divided in little squares with some strange shapes. Then at a certain point, I even followed the track of a turtle that was released in Malta and ended up in Tunis. And for example, at the moment in which this track of the turtle crossed Frontex line, we did a 360 degrees turn. And, and then we started to follow all the points given by alarm phone. They gave me all the points from 2016 till now of call from boat in distress, and I made a sort of constellation. I wanted to end with this constellation going points to points, entering the Libyan Sea, and then drop it in a point that was just outside the, let's say, the British mapping, and that was basically unmapped by the Western navigational charts. And it's the releasing point for me was important. That was deep, so people could not find it, could not see it. So it was basically becoming invisible. So it was dispersed there, even though I had the direct location. But then at a certain point, we started to change the route because we were going to crash with a boat. So the captain was like, Rossella, I cannot do at 360 degrees here with the boat in front because they will think I'm mad and we are going to crash. So that was my first change. And then at a certain point, there was very strong wind as soon as we entered the Libyan Sea, and we had to, at a certain point, turn back and go much, much up. So at the end, I released it in what is the rift in between Sicily and Italy. It's a 1,700 meter deep water. So that's where it stands now.
Well, thanks. It's fascinating to know a little bit more of your work, Rossella. I was wondering, now thinking about what you last said, the fact that sometimes you do something without asking, so without being allowed to do so. Mm-hmm. So, and I was thinking also what you said before about the three materials, or like the three starting point for your work. So I was wondering if also bureaucracy somehow plays a role in your work, because you work a lot with history, for example, and like the intersection of different countries, etc., etc. So I was wondering if bureaucracy is also one of your starting point, or like a material that you explore with your work.
Good point. I think in the beginning, yes, actually, but especially when I worked, of course, with the trial, there is a component that is not so much bureaucracy, if not a sort of legal structure. So, of course, to attain things, you go through the legal structure, and somehow out that enters the work. I think especially with one old work that is from 2008, is called The Undercover Man, is a work on an FBI agent which infiltrated the Italian-American mafia. And at that point, I started to have, let's say, conversation with the FBI and with the court house to receive the transcripts of the trial, and also to receive the investigation from the FBI, so all the document of the investigation. And there is one particular work in which I requested for the life of one of the criminals, and I received it for 2 years in small package because they had to censor it at that time. So they had to go through to be able to give it to me, and I was in the right to receive it because there is, after 20 years, there is the right to request it. So they had to go through the whole documents and censor things and then send it to me. So I included in the show this document. I specifically found it interesting because it was the life of somebody through the FBI, through an FBI file. But also what was interesting that I also inserted in the show, it was that I had the same paper, but through the courthouse uncensored. So basically, in a way, what you can, receive things. But for me, it was really interesting in this, in between the two, as you want, narration of the story. I think now a little bit less, and more than bureaucracy, I will think about structure. For example, now I don't know still if I'm working because I'm in a sort of negotiation, but I'm very interested in a company, in a multinational that produces one technology that is metal pipe for everything from extraction. So from metal pipe of gas, metal pipe of oil, the telescopic pipe for extraction. But in the beginning of 19th century, they were producing with the same exact technology pole for flags and pole for electricity So it's basically one company that has produced the whole history of it with one technology, that is a metal pipe with no welding. That's it. So it's, but I'm going through their system somehow, so through their archive, through their history, but also like what is possible, what is not possible. And so that's more in my contemporary work, is more navigating those systems that can be, for example, a multinational.
Maybe you can say something about what we're going to do on Friday. Speaking about sight and about insisting on going to places and see what might come afterwards. I think there was a beginning of something. You started, maybe you can explain, because on Friday we will do a visit to a site that might have been important for the show, but then ended up not being in the show. And it might also be interesting to join that, or, I mean, to see how you speak about those sites that are still in sort of potential state, not yet, insisting on just revisiting and going there again.
Yes, so when I was invited to do the show, I did my first location visit, and I asked specifically the team of Fabra, the production team, to look for recycling places. So we, because also I had in my mind, we go back also to conductor that has not entered the conversation, but somehow it always floats around. But I had in mind something in relation to a conductor, and I wanted to connect it with recycling, some recycling plants here, and we visited the first place in the city, and it was of everything. It was very small, but they told us that there was a big location outside the city in which they were recycling textile. And I don't remember the place where it is, the town or the location, but is organized by
Sant Esteve de ses Rovires.
Okay, by Roba Mika, that I think is an organization, and is. I can describe maybe a little bit the site. It's a very big facility in which they collect all the clothes, not only from Barcelona, but also from around and the region, and it gets brought there, is divided in various definition. Besides a different form of fiber, is also like what are party clothes, what are jeans, what are working clothes, what is female clothes, what is men clothes, and then they get processed through a sort of small factory system of a line system of people that select in between these clothes what it goes where. And I must say that it's also very important, the organization, because they hire people that are maybe in a particular position of fragility, of inserting to work, or I think when we were there were some detainees, for example. But I think what really interests me is, again, a sort of representation of society through these clothes that arrive there, and how this selection is made by these people and what they select. Of course, there are grids that they have to respect, but somehow the choice is always given to this subject that are there to choose and to divide. And there is a very strong social base in this location. They are fantastic because they are very warm, very welcoming, and of course very interested also in the recycling. They are experimenting with the recycling natural fiber into new yarns. And so, I mean, I think there is a lot of elements that comes in my work and are of my interest. For Fabricots, at the end, we decided to not pursue with creating a new project, but elaborate on what I had already because of time, because of various reasons, and because I don't live here. And for me, engaging with a place and a location, it's really a matter of time and be present. So that was not the right moment to do it, but we are going with Angar to visit again the location. So that's a new beginning, maybe. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.